Welcome back to the Midnight Mirage School of Higher Learning and Higher Wisdom. Now, before we proceed with this tape, I ask that the viewer, the observer, whoever you are, that you take a mental position and an emotional position right now of humility. So in order for us to really get the jewels and the fruit and the substance of this tape, we want to be in a position of humility. We don't want to be in a position of arrogance. We don't want to be in that type of mind frame right now or energy, because even an ounce of arrogance, when you're trying to understand the content of this tape, even a teaspoon of arrogance will confuse you. All right. So we just staying humble to ourselves so we can learn and we can understand really some of the misinformation that's been put out. And, you know, we got to be able to admit that sometimes maybe we were misled. We were lied to. Maybe we were deceived. OK. Now, the reason why I say that is because when you're on a quest for truth, as long as you stay humble, you're going to keep gaining wisdom and knowledge and understanding. And a quote that I always tell myself personally is that the reason why I'm the master is because I know I'll always be the student. Let me repeat that. The reason why I know I'm the master is because I know I'll always be the student. So no matter what level of knowledge I get to, no matter how many books I write, no matter how many people are coming in the comment section saying, oh, Blackbeard, this was a good tape. Because, I know I'm a student of life. Because I know that although I am a man that is pro-truth, but it is the higher power, the creator, or whatever is behind all this, it ultimately has the greatest, genuine, authentic form of the truth. And me personally, I'm on a journey towards that every day. All right. And by me being on that journey, that's how I'm becoming my higher self or my perfected self. So it's almost like, imagine the sun in the sky. You know, the closer you go to the sun, the hotter you're going to get. The hotter the temperature, the higher the temperature is going to rise. So that's how I see me getting to my perfected self, or me getting into my higher self. The more I stay on my purpose, the more I meet my objective, the more I fall in alignment of what I see the overall goal of life is itself, and the little part that I play in it. As long as I stay on that road, I'm going to feel myself getting hotter and hotter and hotter, aka getting closer to the source. All right, getting closer to the source. So understand before we move forward that humility, all right, that's what ultimately is going to get you into your God form, or going to get you into your higher self, or going to get you back in communion with the omniscient. All right. So it's that humility. It's you understanding that I'm always going to be a student of life, no matter how much money I get, no matter how many spiritual powers I think I have. I'm always seeking to get to the ultimate truth, which is what the source is. Because the reason why the temperature is getting hotter, because I'm going towards the sun, because I'm getting closer to the source of where the heat is coming from. So, and using that parable or that analogy, if you feel your wisdom increasing, you feel your knowledge increasing, you see your finances increasing, maybe you got the type of love life you want. In other words, a lot of the different areas and departments of your life, you see them and they almost are in like a perfect state. That is no different than somebody getting hotter and hotter and hotter because they're getting closer to the source. And in order for you to keep getting hotter, and in order for your lifestyle to get better and better and better, because it never ends, the perfection and really the mercy and probably the abundance, I would say, that the higher power has for us, there's no end to it. So you have to be on that journey of being, or on that quest rather, and of falling in love with the journey versus feeling like you want to hurry up and get to the source. Okay. Because that's also one of the reasons maybe why the higher power won't reveal itself to us, Because once it's revealed to us and we know everything, you stop going on that quest and you stop going on that journey, and a little bit of arrogance can set in, a little bit of narcissism can set in, aka a little bit of Luciferianism can set in. And you start coming up with, let's say, rebellious, adversarial type of thoughts and emotions, because maybe you start to take for granted being in the presence of the source. Now, the reason why I'm saying that is because when you look at the Old Testament story in Genesis, or in particular when you read in the Quran, rather, and you hear about the adversary, who was a jinn, aka a spiritual being that had free will, but it was in the presence and it was in allegiance with angels, higher beings that don't have a free will. So that means that this jinn had a particular high station when it came to the spiritual realm. But nevertheless, it was that the arrogance that kicked in that started to lead to a rebellious mentality that ultimately took this entity off the path that it was on. And it became what we all know of as the adversarial one. And in biblical literature, this entity is named as Satan. But in its teaching capacity, it's called Lucifer, because Lucifer is an ancient Canaanite, Latin, Phoenician word, which means light bringer. So when we think about Lucifer, the light bringer, or Satan, the light bringer, what type of light was this entity bringing, and who was it being brought to? And we know that in the story, it was being brought to humanity, aka the man and the woman, in their Garden of Eden, aka their perfected kingdom, aka the realm of earth, in its original form, and them in their original state. And by them accepting these Luciferian ideologies, these rebellious ideologies and principles, and by them implementing these principles and ideals into their own life, it actually caused them to devolve from the original state that they were in. Okay. So what we're going to do in this tape is we will study a little bit about Luciferianism, the true religion of humanity. And the prelude to this tape was me going into what Luciferianism ultimately is. It is a heretical form of religion. It is an adversarial, rebellious form of religion, ideology, and behavioral practice. And it is rebellious and it's heretical to, we'll call, the original order of life, or the original order that the creator or the higher power, whatever set all this up, set in motion and set in place. Okay. So a form of Luciferianism would be, if the sun rises in the daytime and the moon rises in the night, Luciferianism would be scientists coming and trying to create a nighttime sun and a daytime moon. The higher power did not set that up in the original system. So for you to come in and try to create a duplicate form and then flip it, you really are being rebellious and going against the original order. Okay. So yes, we are meant to be our own creator and use our creative gift, but we're not meant to actually try to rival the original creation. All right. So as I said, we're going to talk a little bit about Luciferianism and the Kabbalah as well, because if you saw the previous tape and we talked about some of the occult ideologies of these Caucasian European Freemasonic groups, we learned that, yes, they come from Germany, but where did the German occultists get it from? And ultimately, you'll find out that they got it from what's known as the Kabbalah. And the Kabbalah was introduced to the Western world via a lot of the Jewish Shemitic people, the Israelites, that were leaving Babylon. And a lot of them went into Egypt. They went into Greece, Asia Minor, and then, of course, eventually throughout Europe and the Americas. And when they started to spread throughout the diaspora, they took their Kabbalistic ideologies with them. Now, you got to remember that when the Shemitic Israelites were in Babylon, the reason why they were in Babylon is because they actually perverted and went against their own Shemitic religion. Because what is the Shemitic religion? The Shemitic religion is a monotheistic thought process when the human being acknowledges that there is a higher power, but the higher power is in a spiritual form. It's one higher power, and then you have a creation under that. Now, the reason why it's important for you to understand that is because there were a lot of indigenous American tribes that fundamentally may not have been practicing what we know of today as the Hebrew or Islamic culture, but it was a form of monotheism. And they did not create idols to the God that they acknowledged and observed. All right. So understand that the Shemitic culture, or, you know, what we ultimately know of in the Bible as the religion of Abraham, it's monotheism. Basically, it's the idea that, yes, there is a God or a higher power or creator, but whatever it is, it doesn't come in the form of an image. And the way you interface with it is not by Luciferian means. And when we say Luciferian means, we mean mechanical means, technological means, scientific means that man has created in order for him to interface with the spiritual world. Let me say that one more time. So Luciferianism are the scientific, mechanical means that man has created for him to interface and interact with the spiritual world. Now, we have to understand that, yes, there is a spiritual world and a physical world. Right now, we're in the physical world, the third dimension, what we call 3D, height, width, depth, etc., right? And that there is a spiritual world, but understand that there is a veil or almost a thin layer between the physical world and the spiritual world. And it's there for a reason. Meaning there's a reason why we can't see disembodied spirits. Okay. Now, when we say the term jinn in Islam, we really just mean a disembodied spirit, whether it's positive or negative, no matter what kind of creature it could be or humanoid it would be. But in other words, a living being that you can't see. You can't physically see it. That doesn't mean that it's not in your presence. It more than likely may be jinn around me right now, listening to these tapes, but I can't physically see them. So whenever the higher power or God or the creator created the physical realm, there was a division or a wall put up between the physical world and the spiritual world. And it was put there for a reason. OK, so typically whenever you see a fence or a wall up, that is showing you a boundary, and it's showing you that you have free reign up until this point. And anything after this point will be you intruding into this other region that you don't have jurisdiction and authorization to go to. Now, when we think about the spiritual world will be that realm or that place on the other side of the fence. And you go through the fence one or two ways. Either you naturally expired in the physical world and it's time for your spirit and your soul and your energy body to transition into the spiritual world, and that's why you went. You went into the spiritual world consciously or mentally or emotionally, because I'm going to go ahead and say this: the higher power of the creator will send angelic forces in your life, and you will have certain spiritual experiences that are natural and organic, and they were meant to be positive for you. You all have them all the time. Like I may have said this once, but I remember one time my brother, he told me he was literally just driving down the street, right? And he got to a stoplight. He got to the stoplight. He's sitting there minding his business. A man in the car next to him, he said, was just smiling at him, looking at him, basically giving him positive energy. And he said the man let down the window and gave him some money and just drove off. So that was a situation where more than likely my brother had a spiritual experience. It was a favorable, positive one. And more than likely the higher power constructed that for my brother to have that in that space and time. There was nothing my brother physically did, mentally did, emotionally did, scientifically did, technologically did to make that happen. He literally was just going about his day and came into that encounter or came into that spiritual experience. So you can go into it that way, or you can force your way into it. And the way you force your way into the spiritual world are by a lot of black magic and certain spiritual practices that human beings get themselves involved in. And this is what they use to enter into that realm. Also, some of it could be what people try to force activate their third eye, their pineal gland. They try to force it to activate in an aggressive manner, which is Luciferianism. So understand that human beings practice Luciferianism when they use scientific, spiritual, technological, etc. means to intrude, bombard, and aggressively force themselves into the spiritual world and force themselves into spiritual experiences. It would be like a person trying to force a dream to happen. You can't force a dream. You just either take a nap or you go to bed at night, and then the dream experience is almost like it happens to you. It's a natural, organic experience. But when you try to force one, now you're going into the realm of Luciferianism. And when you're going into the realm of Luciferianism, you may not experience what my brother experienced, because now it's almost like you opened up a door. You know what I'm gonna tell you what it's like. For all of y'all that may have seen the movie Insidious, I really hope some of y'all have seen this movie so you can understand the context of what I'm saying. But basically at the end of the movie, it was a part where the little boy got stuck into the spiritual world, and his father went into a form of meditation in the physical world and projected himself into the spiritual world to bring his son back to the physical world, right? But while he was doing that, because he had forced himself into the physical spiritual world by meditating, etc., that it were malefic, evil spiritual beings that caught wind of him, and they followed him back to the physical world. And in the movie, it literally showed the evil spiritual beings materializing into the physical world after they followed him, breaching his way into it. And it also showed you in the movie how the evil beings in the spiritual world weren't even aware of him until he had forced himself into the spiritual world, and he just used his voice, talking all loud, and now he got their attention. And now they follow him back into the physical world. So they're trying to show you in a lot of these Hollywood movies that when you force your way into the spiritual world by any means, you don't know what may follow you back, what kind of energy may follow you back, something that you can't see that may follow you back. And I'll just leave it at that, because I don't want to sound too mystical and shit like that, because we ain't about that over here. We dealing in the realm of truth. But I got to keep it real on that. Like, we don't necessarily know what may come back from that. Like when they talk about the CERN machine, or they talk about, these different quantum mechanics and quantum sciences, and how they have these particle colliders, and they try to, really mechanically recreate and simulate the Big Bang. See, by them doing that, they don't know what they're going to tap into, and I'll just leave it at that. So what I want to do right here is give a brief reading on what is the Kabbalah and what is Luciferianism. What was it that was taught to Eve that she in turn taught to Adam, that the original man and woman are taught to humanity as a whole? What was it? What was the lie that adversary told them? What was the religion that he told them? And let's see. Now I'm getting this from, it's an excerpt from the book, The Meaning of Masonry by W.L. Wimhurst. I talked about it a little bit in the previous tape, but it was a good point because we want to use this to understand what Luciferianism is. It says this: the evolution of man into Superman was always the purpose of the ancient mysteries, and the real purpose of modern masonry is not the social and charitable purposes to which so much attention is paid, but the expediting of the spiritual evolution of those who aspire to perfect their own nature and transform it into a more godlike quality. And this is a definite science, a royal art, which it is possible for each of us to put into practice, while to join the craft for any other purpose than to study and pursue the science is to misunderstand its meaning. So when Adam and Eve, aka the original humans, the original indigenous people of the earth, when they spread out and they started to create their civilizations, they started to create, you could say schools to show the people this scientific, technological, mechanical way, a human way to become a Superman or a superwoman, to become a god, Because remember, the adversary or Satan, it told Eve that if you eat from the fruit, aka if you adopt these principles, then you will become like gods. This is what they were told. So that's the whole point of it. That's the point of becoming a Freemason, a Shriner. That's the point, to become a man god. So they see themselves as their own gods. That is what the ancient religion was. So any kind of practice you saw the people doing, whether it was astrology, whether it was following omens, whether it was human sacrifice, no matter what it was all for them to somehow, some way become their own god and to attain power so they could have control over something. See, Luciferianism is about control, aggressiveness, and life as a human being is about humility, understanding you don't control everything, understanding that the higher power has predestined for life to go a certain way. But when you rebel against that, that's Luciferianism. And you try to figure out a way to control things and make things go the way you want them to go. So we're not even talking about free will at this point. We're talking about basically becoming your own version of a tyrant, because that's what Satan did. He became a tyrant and taught humanity how to become a tyrant. All right. So understand that, the evolution, but Kabbalah ultimately, which is basically just a heretical Jewish religion, it is to teach the practitioner how to become a god, just like Eve was told. That's ultimately what it is. Now, the next thing I want to do we want to do, and then we're going to wrap it up, is we're going to talk about the Luciferian religion of ancient America. Because a lot of us see the pyramids, we see the mounds, we see, the different hieroglyphics of the Maya, the Aztec, the Inca. But what were the religious practices of these people? Did these people believe in one God? Did they have pagan practices? What kind of religious practices would they have in comparison to the people that were in the biblical days? Was their religion more like the Shemitic Israelites, or was it more like the Egyptians and the Babylonians? And that's what we're going to look into right now. So before we go into this, I want you to understand that when we're talking about the ancient Americas, we're talking about as far as mainland North America, the Mississippians and all the various tribes that stemmed from it. Understand that out of all the ancient American people, it's going to break down to two types of religion. You're going to have certain groups of people here that believed in what they either thought was a spiritual God or a wind God, or basically one God that they could not see. And they observed this God, they respected this God. And in my terminology, I'm correlating that to like the God of Israel. One God that you can't see. We're talking about monotheism. So no, the indigenous Muskogee did not call him the God of Israel. They may not use that terminology. No, the ancient Mississippians probably didn't practice, modern day Islam like you probably think they do. But all I'm saying is that the belief in one God, because you had ancient people in India that believed in one God. You had ancient people in China that believed in one God. You had ancient people in Taiwan that believed in one God. So the Shemitic Israelites of Judaism and the quote unquote Arabs of Islam, they're not the only people in earth history that only believed in one God. That's not the case. You had a lot of ancient civilizations that believed in only one God. And it was no different in the Americas. So you had the people that believed in one God, and then you had the people that believed in the sun God. Now, before I move forward, I want you to understand this. The sun God is in every religion of every civilization. The ancient Maya had a sun god. The ancient Inca had a sun god. The ancient Egyptians had a sun god. The ancient Vikings had a sun god. The ancient Phoenicians had a sun god. The ancient Hindustan had a sun god. So all these cultures had a sun god, right? But what I want you to understand is that the sun god in pagan religion is actually Satan. I'm going to say that again. The sun god in pagan religion is actually Lucifer or Satan in his various incarnations. So whether they call him the sun god Mithras, whether they call him the sun god Horus, or whether they call him the sun god Jesus of the Catholic Church, all of them are different forms of Satan as Lucifer, the sun god, in his teaching capacity. Now, why am I calling him the sun god in a teaching capacity? You got to understand that in the ancient world, the people correlated the sun with wisdom and knowledge. And whenever you would see a heroic character correlated with the sun, this was a person that was seen to be a wise person, a smart person. They brought innovation, technology, and science, and it brought the people out of darkness and made things better for them. So they would usually revere this person, and they would correlate them with the sun god. This is the same thought process and the same perspective that Adam and Eve had of Satan, the adversary, which if you think it was in a spiritual form, but me personally, I think it may have been a man under possession of that spirit. But nevertheless, they saw it as this sun god. I want you to think about Aten or Akhenaten and how you see Akhenaten worshiping the sun god. All those sun gods are a form of what in biblical literature is called Satan. Basically that adversarial, rebellious spirit. All civilizations and all religions talk about a adversarial and rebellious spirit and spirits. Okay? So that's not just particular to Islam and Judaism with the shayateen and what we call devils in so-called Christianity. All cultures have these types of groups of evil beings. They just are called different things. And they're no different in the ancient Americas. Now, when you think about the ancient Vodun religion, the ancient Mississippian religion of New Orleans, when you think about Haiti, the so-called voodoo religion of Haiti, a lot of that stems from this ancient pagan culture. And when you think about the human sacrifice religion of the ancient Maya, that is their Luciferian form of religion. So let's read a little bit about it and let's see why they do it. Remember, like I told you, when you want to force yourself and you want into the spiritual realm or you want to control things, you practice Luciferianism. So understand that all people who practice any type of occultism, Luciferianism, etc., it's all for them to gain some type of power. It's all for them to exalt themselves in some type of a godlike position. It's all for them to gain money, resources, women, etc. That's what it's about. You know, when you think about that, you know, the Faustian pact with the devil is for you to become this great musician or for you to become this great thing. So in other words, nobody is practicing Luciferianism to try to contact the true God because they love it. It's for them to get some type of power or to exalt themselves some type of way. It has something to do with their ego. So let's read this. This is coming from Thought Co. Maya bloodletting rituals, ancient sacrifice to speak to the gods. Now, before we move forward, these gods that the ancient Maya, our American ancestors, I want you to think about what gods were they really in contact with. Were they in contact with quote unquote disembodied ancestors that they thought? Or were they in contact with certain devilish beings that were shape-shifting and taking on the image of something that they once knew? All right, this came out on November the 30th, 2018 by Nicoletta Maestri. Bloodletting, cutting part of the body to release blood, is an ancient ritual used by many Mesoamerican societies. For the ancient Maya, bloodletting rituals were a way that Maya nobles communicated with their gods and royal ancestors. The word Ka'ab means penance in the Maya Kaolin language and may be related to the Yucatecan word Ka'ab, meaning dripper/dropper. The bloodletting practice usually involved only the highest nobles who would perforate their own body parts, mainly, but not only their tongues, lips, and genitals. So you had ancient Maya elite and royal nobility who wanted to have conversations with what they thought were their ancestors. And what they would do is practice bloodletting by basically, cutting wounds in themselves and letting their own blood pour out. Now, this is no different than the scarification rituals of the ancient Canaanites and how when you see some of the ancient African tribes, the West African tribes, how they will mutilate themselves and scar their bodies and stuff like that. Even in the Catholic Church, how you would see them whipping themselves and things like that. See, there was an ideology or belief in the ancient world that in order to get in contact with the spiritual world, you had to sacrifice yourself or sacrifice something else. In other words, it had to be a blood exchange. All right. But both men and women practice these types of sacrifices. Bloodletting rituals, along with fasting, tobacco smoking, and ritual enemas, was pursued by the royal Maya in order to provoke a trance-like state or altered state of consciousness, and thereby achieve supernatural visions and communicate with dynastic ancestors or underworld gods. The trances were to petition their ancestors and the gods for rain, good harvest, and success in warfare, among other needs and desires. Now, I don't even have to read the rest of it. I'm going to read this last part because this is showing you right here why they did it, the state of mind that it put them in, etc. And also what they were in communication with. So they would do the bloodletting rituals along with fasting, smoking tobacco, probably a little marijuana, especially here in America. They would ritualistically kill their enemies. But they would do this in order to provoke a trance-like state or an altered state of consciousness. So understand that in all the pagan religion, it's always going to be either a type of drug, wine, alcohol, or the bloodletting, something that's going to alter your state of consciousness. And when they're in that state of mind, they think that it's going to be an easier way to communicate in the quote unquote spiritual world. And they thereby thought that they were having supernatural visions and communicating with dynastic ancestors or underworld gods. Now, more than likely, they were hallucinating and they were dizzy, and well, suffering from dizziness, rather. Because when you start to lose blood, you start to lose your consciousness. Awareness, rather, excuse me. But it said they did this to achieve supernatural visions, aka, once again, didn't I say force yourself into the spiritual world? Force visions. If the visions didn't naturally come to them, they're trying to force them. And it said communicate with dynastic ancestors or underworld gods. So they thought that when a person died, they went to the realm of hell or the infernal realm, the Klepoth, the chthonic realm. And who is the head person of hell? Who is the lead spirit of hell? So-called Satan, right? So this is why that was the spirit that most people were in contact with, because they thought that that's who their ancestors was in communion with. And all of that wasn't true. Okay, that wasn't true. So it said that they were going to these trances and petition their ancestors and the quote unquote gods for rain, good harvest, and success in warfare. Now, let me ask you this. Doesn't it rain natural? How many of you all, I don't give a fuck if you 10 years old, 20 years old, 30 years old, 40 years old, 50 years old. You know your whole life you've seen days when it rained and days that it did not. But in the ancient world, because a lot of their crops and resources were dependent upon the rain, and it was such a serious thing to them, and they didn't have the luxury to certain information and technology that we have today, that it became a spiritual religious matter for the rain to actually keep coming. And the people thought they had to take these occultic, ways to make rain come. Now, we know today that's not true, but in the ancient world, that's what some of the people thought. And it also goes on to say that they would do this for success in warfare. So they would literally bloodlet themselves, probably commit sacrifices with their own children to some disembodied spirit that they think is going to help them in warfare. Now, if you have them same type of beliefs, that's on you. You know what I'm saying? I mean, but, I know personally today that I don't think you need to do that to have good success in warfare. And the reason why, and we're going to say this and wrap it up. So what happened with the Shemitic culture was the Shemitic culture was living in the ancient days with their family, with the rest of humanity. And they were noticing that something ain't right about this. So you started to see a distinguish between people who would take those type of practices serious and do them, and then people who would question them and say, I don't know about that. Just like you would have the story of Abraham. When Abraham was a young man, he questioned his father and his father's practice of bowing to those idols and idol worship. He questioned them. He questioned Nimrod and his religion of worshiping idols. Okay. And also, when you see when Abraham is told to sacrifice his child, but in the story it tells you that the angel stopped him, that is trying to give you a parable or an analogy to distinguish the Shemitic religion, which we do not sacrifice our children. We do not bloodlet. And the true God does not require you to do that. To distinguish the true God from the Egyptian God, from the Maya God, from the Aztec God, from the ancient Mesoamerican God, the ancient sun god, Satan, who said he does require blood sacrifice. So this is why Abraham was stopped by the angel. It is really for the viewer to understand and the reader to understand. This is the difference between the Shemitic Abrahamic religion and the difference between the Canaanite religion that he was surrounded around, which were the people were sacrificing their children. Because if the Shemitic religion was the same, then Abraham would have sacrificed his son. And the reason why Abraham was already primed to do it, because every other religion around him, that's what the people were doing. That was a common belief of his day. So there had to be a way to distinguish him from that and show him, no, you don't have to do that in order to still get success in life. So, I just wanted to go through this, kind of talk a little bit more about the Luciferianism and just, that religion, so you can understand it when you see it. But hopefully some people learn from this. Stay tuned. I'm out.